Alright, so welcome to the course. We're going to look at the first game that I had in mind, which was a game between Timur Radyabov and Gabriel Sargsyan from the 2018 Olympiad in Georgia that I was also playing in. And I think this was a really nice game from Radyabov, who showed the right thought process throughout the game, but also had to use concrete calculation to justify the way he was playing. So the game started relatively quietly. It was Queen's Gambit declined. It started with d4, knight f6, c4, e6. White played knight f3. Of course, knight c3 would be the Nimzo Indian instead, but this is not an openings course, so we're just going to stick to how the game went. So this was knight f3, d5, knight c3, bishop e7, bishop g5, h6. And here Radyabov took on f6, which is a little unusual. Normally people would play bishop h4 in this position, but it's also a line. So following bishop f6, e3, castle, rook c1, c6, bishop d3, knight d7, castle, dc4, bishop c4, and e5. This is the part where I want to start thinking about the game for the first time. So basically, here White has a decision to make because Black is trying to open the position for his bishop pair, and he's also potentially looking to give White an isolated pawn. So imagine White were to take on e5 here, which might seem like a natural move because it avoids getting the isolated pawn after e takes d4. Unfortunately, here Black is quickly seeing his pieces jump to life, and following knight takes e5, and bishop takes e5, I don't think White has very much compensation for Black's healthy bishop pair. Already here, something like queen h4 is probably a pretty strong threat, or maybe bishop h2 first, with the idea to play queen h4 next and take this bishop on c4. And I think the biggest thing that I don't like is that this knight on c3 is really lousy and the bishop on e5 is really good. White would like to play a move like knight e4 to abuse the weak squares, but all sorts of stuff is hanging. b2 is hanging, bishop h2, and queen h4 is hanging. This is not good. So White decided to maintain the tension. He also could have considered playing d5, which is hoping to play against this bishop on f6. And if Black had to take on d5 here, I think White probably would have gone for this, as after something like bishop takes d5. I think he has a very good position. Here, if this pawn on e5 could migrate back to e6, I think Black would be better, because it would open up this bishop and shut down this one, but he can't do that. And I believe he's worse because of White's pressure on the light squares. However, I'm sure that Radyabov understood that White was not going to play this way, or excuse me, that Black would not play this way, and would instead play knight b6, challenging this bishop on c4 and forcing it to retreat. And after something like bishop b3 and then e4 from Black, I think Black is doing absolutely fine because he is hitting this knight who doesn't really have a great place to go. In the event of knight d4, Black can take on d5 when the knight on d4 breaks the coordination from the queen and White cannot take back very easily. And if White takes this pawn on e4, then following bishop takes b2, rook b1, and c takes d5, Black is equalizing material and is absolutely fine here. His bishops may one day count. So what I really like was that Radyabov played the move bishop b3, and then after e takes d4, I think it's very important that he took back with the pawn. If White were to take back with the knight here, this position is more about piece activity than anything else, because Black is going to have a very healthy position strategically no matter what, due to the bishop pair. But if White can keep superior piece activity, he'll have good chances. Here Black's pieces will spring to life. After knight c4, he's challenging this bishop on b3, which eventually turned out to be the best piece on the board. And Black has a very comfortable position after something like, say, bishop c4 and queen e7, when White playing bishop c4 to b3 back to c4 in the last few moves is not very inspiring, and Black can look for maybe rook d8 next. In any case, Radyabov took on d4, and here the battle lines have been drawn, because Black has a better pawn structure due to White's isolated pawn on d4 and the bishop pair. But what White has is control over some key central squares, and in particular this bishop on b3 exerts a lot of very unpleasant pressure along this diagonal. Pressure that's going to be very hard to neutralize. And while White certainly isn't threatening to sacrifice anything on f7 or launch a mating attack right away, it can become difficult for Black to coordinate his pieces. We'll see what I mean. So after rook e8, White played h3, and at this point I think that this is around the point where I believe that Sargsyan started to mess up. I think what he should have done was basically try to neutralize this bishop at all costs. The move he played was knight b6, which makes a lot of sense. Black is bringing out a new piece, or he's improving the knight, controlling the d5 square better, and getting ready to bring out his bishop.
What do you want to achieve in chess? Maybe you want to reach 2000 rating, win a tournament, or become the best player at your club. Whatever your chess goals, the iChess Club gives you the best chance of achieving them. Imagine immersing yourself in chess, surrounding yourself with world-class coaching from some of the best players in the world. Imagine the effect on your game when you're constantly learning new ideas, sharpening your skills, and developing your opening expertise. All members of the iChess Club get $20 store credit every month, plus a permanent 40% discount on all our chess courses, allowing you to keep improving week in, week out. Our courses feature the very best presenters, including Anatoly Karpov, Judith Polgar, and Nigel Short, higher quality than you'll find anywhere else. And there's more. You get exclusive access to the Video Encyclopedia of Chess Openings, your private resource for opening training with videos showing you how to come out on top in specific variations. We add videos every week, so there's always something new to watch. Members can also watch 30-minute previews of any chess course in our store. Missed out on a sale? iChess Club members can claim special deals up to 30 days after the sale offer has closed to the public and save an extra 5% too. Ready to get the kind of improvement that comes with immersing yourself in chess? We want to welcome you to the iChess Club by giving you your first month for just $1. Yes, just $1. And you still get the $20 store credit and all other benefits. Click the button on this page to become a member of the iChess Club and start your chess journey today. Ready to really commit to your chess future? Unlock the ultimate value with our Gold and Platinum iChess Club memberships. Enjoy $35 store credit every month with Gold and $70 credit with Platinum. On top of that, Gold members save 50% in the store and Platinum members get a massive 60% off, making it much easier to get your hands on that chess bundle you've had your eyes on. When a sale comes around, Gold members will enjoy a further 10% off the sale price, with Platinum members getting an additional 15%. Join the iChess Club as a Gold or Platinum member, and your first month is half price too. Just click the button on this page and start enjoying your membership benefits right away.
But the problem is, after Rookie 1, he's not going to be able to challenge this A2, G8 diagonal, and at some point knight e5 is going to hurt, and that's sort of what happened in the game. I believe black could have given himself much better chances to equalize if he had tried the move knight f8 instead, with the point that now he's ready to play bishop e6 next, and white cannot stop him with a move like rook e1, because here after something like rook e1, since the knight is lending added support to the e6 square, black is able to play bishop e6 anyway. And here I think that white is just worse, because black has managed to neutralize this bishop on b3 while preserving this isolated pawn on d4 as a weakness and not letting white liquidate it with a move like d5 at some inconvenient moment. So I believe that he should have done this. It's possible Sargsyan was scared about d5, but here I think that black is absolutely fine after bishop f5 when all of a sudden it will be his pawn structure that ends up worse after something like dc6, bc6. Here, of course, black's not thrilled about having these two isolated pawns, but at the same time, the big problem that he was facing this game overall was that he was struggling to get his pieces out, and now all of a sudden his bishops look fantastic, and he is ready to play either knight g6 or knight e6 next, when all of his minor pieces look really good. And again, this knight on c3 is pretty lousy for white. It's dominated pretty nicely by the pawn on c6. This is probably about equal. Instead, though, Sargsyan played knight b6. Sorry, let me move this away. Let's hope that wasn't a problem earlier. Instead, though, Sargsyan played knight b6. And here, after knight b6, if white falls asleep at the wheel and lets black play bishop e6, then I think black will equalize very comfortably. So, for example, if white were to proceed along with a normal developing move like queen d2, now I think after bishop e6, black is slightly better because he will be able to neutralize the b3 bishop, and therefore he will never have to worry about moves like knight e5 hitting the f7 pawn or anything like that, and can hope to in the long run play against the d4 pawn. So for example, after something like bishop e6, rook e6, and say rook fe1, and black goes something like queen e7, rook e6, queen e6, rook e1, and queen back to d7, and black is ready to play rook d8 next, and he's exerting a fair amount of pressure on this d4 pawn while he has no weaknesses of his own. The position isn't that terrible for white, but I definitely think he's slightly worse. Instead, Radyabov played this very well because he chose to play rook e1 first. And the point here is that black now is not able to play bishop e6 very comfortably, because if he does, he will leave himself with a very bad isolated pawn on e6, as well as giving white a fantastic outpost on e4. At this point, following bishop e6, rook e6, rook e6, f e6, white is much better after a move like queen b3, when it becomes very annoying to defend this pawn. Black would like to play knight d5, but he can't thanks to the hanging pawn on b7, so he should try something like queen d7, but following rook e1, and say knight d5 now and knight e4. Black's really in a tough spot because knight c5 is a threat, knight takes f6 is a threat that would sort of force black to play gf6 to avoid losing a pawn and severely compromising his king. And if black were to try to stop both threats with a move like bishop e7, well, of course, there follows knight e5. And white's pieces are quickly jumping to life, and black has a very difficult position. But you might say, fine, black can get his bishop outside the pawn chain with bishop f5. And here I believe Radjabov played a very good move. So I would like to invite everybody to pause their videos and see if they can figure out what Radjabov played, which, as I said, I believe was extremely powerful. So I'm going to ask you to pause your videos plenty of times throughout the course, but this is a largely strategic decision that didn't have much to do with calculation just yet. Basically here, as we're talking about, what white really wants to do is use this bishop and exert further pressure upon this pawn and get a move like knight e5 in. The problem with knight e5 is that because it breaks your coordination on the e-file, black is now ready to play bishop e6, and you can no longer butcher his pawn structure with bishop takes e6, since after bishop e6 and rook e6, black can comfortably take back with the rook. Furthermore, black would very much like to get bishop e6 in, and while he couldn't do it last move, he has a very real plan to play queen d7, or queen d6 for that matter, and then bishop back to e6, when you won't be able to butcher his pawn structure and he still neutralize this bishop. So I very much like Radjabov's decision to play g4. And the point of this move is he is forcing this bishop on d7 to make a decision as to where it wants to go. Because if it retreats to d7, this is a sad sign because now it becomes very difficult for black to develop his queen. For example, following queen d2, black really has nowhere to go because in the event of queen c7, now knight e4 becomes extremely powerful since the queen is clearly missed on d8 where she was protecting this bishop on f6, because if black has to retreat the bishop and then a move like knight e5 comes, or even d5 here for example, black could end up in huge trouble. So basically black is heavily incentivized to leave the bishop along the b1 h7 diagonal. Which means that d7 will be free for his queen and he won't have to suffocate under all this space. But here we see the problem, which is that after bishop g6, now black is never going to be able to neutralize the pressure on this diagonal, which really came into fruition later on in the game, and something that Radjabov was clearly banking on in the way he played, and he handled this phase very well. So after rook takes e8 check, queen takes e8, queen d2, white was ready for rook e1 next. Black played queen d7, which may not have been best, but I guess the point was he probably was going to have to anyway because of rook e1 coming. But after queen f4, rook e8, here this is the next spot where I think Radjabov made a really excellent decision. And again, I'd like to invite everyone to pause their videos to see if they can figure out what he might have played. Alright, so if you want more time, keep your videos paused. In general, I'm going to go through the pauses pretty quickly because I don't want to just be sitting here twiddling my thumbs. But as long as you've had enough time to pause the video, you're good to go. So basically, what white would like to do is play the move knight e5. But when you start calculating, you realize it doesn't work that well. Because after knight e5 here, black has a couple of interesting options. But I think bishop g5 is probably the easiest when you're forcing all the pieces off the board. And after something like queen g5, hg5, knight d7, knight d7. I think it's pretty clear that as black, once the queens and stuff get off the board, black no longer has to worry so much about this bishop on b3 because he can easily bring his king to the center and play something like king f8, f6, king e7. While if the queens were on the board and he went king f8, f6, you could easily imagine a queen showing up on g8 and causing problems. In addition to that, black can also take on e5, which is probably even stronger, with the point that after d takes e5 and now queen c7, this pawn on e5 is a goner, thanks in no small part to the pin, and this so that it can't move. And after something like rook e1, black now, well, it's easy, but again, pause your video, what to play. Alright, so the move is knight d7, and the e5 pawn is lost. So knight e5 is the move that Radjabov really wants to play, but he can't play it right now. So he has to come up with a proper way of preparing it. And I really like the move he chose, which is rook to d1. His point is that when he plays knight to e5, first of all, now there will no longer be any bishop g5 business to annoy him. But at the same time, he also is anticipating bishop takes e5, d takes e5, when all of a sudden the d file will become open. And here black actually is struggling to find a move. His best move is probably knight d5, but this is not a very happy move because it allows white to give black an isolated pawn as well. After knight takes d5, c takes d5, and knight e5, I believe white is slightly better here, but black's drawing chances are pretty high. For example, I checked the variation queen b5, knight g6, f g6, queen f3, and after king h7, and something like queen takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop takes d5, rook d8, bishop takes b7, and rook takes d4. I believe black will hold a draw here without a ton of discussion. He is a pawn down, which obviously he doesn't like, but with the opposite colored bishops, the lack of weaknesses, and the symmetry, I think that black should hold this without a ton of trouble. White doesn't necessarily need to take on g6 right away, but I'm not sure how else he would want to improve his position. At some point, black could look to play bishop e4 to save that bishop. He can also consider playing a5, a4. In any case, this is what black should have done. But this is a hard decision to take, to just accept that you're slightly worse and hope that you're able to defend and save the game. Instead, Sargsyan played queen c8, and I imagine what he wanted with this move was to play queen b8 next, to challenge white's queen on f4, where she's very well placed. And of course, the more trades we get, the closer we get to an endgame where black's pressure against the d4 pawn will matter much more than any potential problem on f7 he could face. So I think that this was a totally understandable decision, but now Radyabov is able to execute his plan. After knight e5, bishop e5, d e5. Here, if black were to play queen c7, we would have the exact same position that we saw a second ago, except white's rook is on d1 instead of c1. With the rook on c1, white was simply losing the e5 pawn, but here white has an extra resource. It's not super hard, but still, you should pause your video, see if you can find it. Okay, so if you want more time, please keep your video paused. But the move is rook d6. This breaks black's coordination and means he cannot take on e5. It also breaks the pin. And now, in addition, black also isn't in time to play a move like knight d7 because rook d6 comes with the incidental threat of rook takes g6, which here immediately finishes the game. So black would have to spend his time defending his bishop on g6 with something like king h8. And now all sorts of moves are good for white. I believe the computer's favorite is h4, trying to chase this bishop further with h5 to undermine the defense of the f7 pawn. And while I'm sure that's the best move, also something simple like queen d4 makes a lot of sense where white... Also something simple like queen d4 would make a lot of sense here, where white is taking the open file fully under his control, can prepare for f4 next to bolster the e5 pawn and gain more space with f5. And I think black's position is wretched. So, after rook d8, or Sargsyan chose to play rook d8 with the point of trying to contest the open d file. Radyabov wouldn't be very happy to take on d8, because then after queen takes d8, he's probably still better here, but at least black has taken the open file. So I very much like his decision to try to preserve the open file. Also something simple like queen d4 would make a lot of sense here, where white is taking the open file fully under his control, can prepare for f4 next to bolster the e5 pawn and gain more space with f5, and I think black's position is wretched. So, after rook d8, or Sargsyan chose to play rook d8 with the point of trying to contest the open d file, Radyabov wouldn't be very happy to take on d8, because then after queen takes d8, he's probably still better here, but at least black has taken the open file. So I very much like his decision to try to preserve the open file with the move rook d4. And then, and here we can sort of see that this pressure on this pawn on f7 is really starting to become real. It will not take that long for white to play something like queen e3 and then start throwing f4, f5, at which point the pin on the f7 pawn means that it can't move, and the black bishop can't escape back to e8, and it's going to be hard to keep f7 protected. And this bishop on b3, black never really managed to neutralize, largely because of Radyabov's excellent decision to play g4 and force black's bishop towards g6 or h7, instead of letting it come back around to e6. So after rook d8, rook d4, Sargsyan played queen c7, and now white has a winning tactic. See if you can figure out what he should play. You should pause your videos here. Alright, so if you want more time, please keep your videos paused. The move that white wants to play to bash through the position is e6, and here it turns out to work. The point is that after queen takes f4, white will not meekly take back with rook takes f4, as then after something like f takes e6 check, bishop e6, and king h7. Black's probably only a little bit worse here and can look for counterplay with rook d2 in the coming moves. But instead, white will take the rook on d8 with the point that after king h7 and e7, he's going to make a new queen. It looks like this doesn't work because black can make the move f5 or something to clear this for the bishop. But after f5, again, here white has a very good move. Just like to give you a second to see if you can find it. But I'm about to keep going, so if you haven't paused your videos, you should do so by now. Here we're seeing another point of this bishop on b3 just being so useful, is that it can really harass black's king even when it's run away. And after bishop g8 check, black is forced into a deadly discovery, and following bishop f7 check, king h7 and bishop takes g6 check, white will make a queen and win the game. So at this point here, after e6, black actually is unable to take the queen, but otherwise he's really in a quandary, because if he makes a move like queen e7, and white gets to go rook takes d8 check and e takes f7 check, we're clearly seeing just how valuable this bishop on b3 became. It gave white this monstrously strong pass pawn on f7, and black should be completely lost. So Sargsyan found the best practical try with rook c8. And here, there's multiple ways for white to play, but I really like the way that Radyabov chose, which was to go queen takes c7, rook takes c7, rook d8 check, forcing black's king to f7, and now a final move that really put the nail in the coffin for black, which again sort of really used the bishop on b3 to its maximum effect. Like everyone to just pause their videos, see if they can find it. Alright, so the best move is f4. Well, now that basically what happened was white had, with his g4 move early in the game, pushed black's bishop back to g6. Now he's ready to play f5 and potentially trap that bishop. And it's very hard for black to deal with just because this bishop on b3 is so strong. For example, if black were to play f5, trying to stop f5 from white, white has no shortage of winning moves, but something like bishop c2 looks very easy to me, with the point that in the event of fg4, white can of course play f5. He would not want to play bishop g6. That's probably pretty good, but this is immediately death. Where this bishop on c2 is just crushing black, because as soon as the bishop moves, f6 and f7 will come. So black took on e6, and here white has another very important move. Again, really utilizing the power of the bishop on b3. Of course, white could take on e6, and he's probably a bit better after bishop f7, but the problem is here, as soon as black was able to trade to challenge this bishop on the a2 g8 diagonal, his defensive chances increased significantly. He's definitely a little worse after bishop e4, bishop f5 check, g6, and say something like bishop d3, because white controls the open file, has a little bit more space, his pawn majority is more mobile. So he's definitely a little bit better here, but he can do much stronger. And the point is that he's going to go f5, smashing open this long diagonal for the bishop. And even without queens, the threat of bringing the bishop to g8 turns out to be very strong. And black just never managed to neutralize this b3 bishop. He could have done this by playing, he could have done that earlier by playing knight f8 instead of knight b6 so that he could get bishop e6 in. And he also could have played knight d5 at some moment to try to change the pawn structure and block the bishop off with the pawn on d5. Because he didn't do either of those things and Radyabov calculated well, this bishop on b3 sort of won him the game. So here, the point is, of course, if g takes f5, white is going to play bishop g8 check with a deadly discovery. After king to h8, here this is a case where the threat is stronger than the execution. I'd like to see if everyone can pause their videos and figure out what white should play here. Alright, if you want more time, keep your videos paused. Well, white doesn't have a deadly discovery with the bishop right now. What he can do is take on f5, and this will force black's bishop onto a very unpleasant square no matter where it goes. If bishop h7, for example, white can retreat this bishop anywhere along the long diagonal like this, and then black will be forced to block on g8 and get mated. And of course, black, if bishop f7, bishop takes f7 comes with check, so black is mated next move on bishop g6. Bishop e8 is not safe. If bishop f5, there is bishop e6 check, and if bishop h5, again, there is bishop f7 check. So, so basically here, no matter what's going to happen, black is losing a piece. Sargsyan understandably didn't want this and instead went for bishop f7. But after f takes e6, now this e-pawn should easily decide the game. Black is forced to play bishop g6 because if bishop to g8, white will win with any number of continuations, the easiest being rook takes g8, pointing out if king g8, this bishop on b3 wins the game again after e7 check, because black doesn't have time to stop white from making a new queen. So black tried bishop g6, and white is winning here strategically, statically, however you want, but I quite like the way that Radyabov chose to continue, which is to play h5 and continue chasing this bishop who, while he's on a long diagonal, if you look, is actually pretty short on squares. g6 is the only square where this bishop is safe, and if white plays h5 next, the bishop will actually get trapped. So for example, if black were to play something like rook e7, I suppose with the intention of blockading this pawn and clearing the e8 square for black's bishop. After h5 and bishop e8, and then knight e4 comes with knight d6 to follow, black's position falls apart at the seams. Sargsyan understandably didn't want that and tried to make some room with his bishop by playing h5, but this didn't save him either. After g takes h5, bishop takes h5, bishop c2 check, this bishop transferred somewhere else. Now black could have tried g6, that would have given him some defensive hope, but it still would have been pretty meager. Instead, he played bishop g6, and after knight e4, white's threat of knight g5 check followed by rook h8 is utterly crushing, and if black were to take this knight, then after bishop takes e4 check, king h6 gets mated in 1 after rook h8, but if g6 there follows h5, and white will obviously win with the two passed pawns. So Sargsyan tried bishop f5, but this also didn't really help very much, because after knight g5 check, king g6, and now one last move, and then we will say this game more or less over. But last chance to pause your videos and try to find the way that really should have made black resign, although he kept playing a couple moves. Alright, so with that last chance to pause can go over it. The best move is e7, threatening e8 queen, and the point is that in the event of rook takes e7, rook d6 check will come, the bishop on f5 is lost. Sargsyan played a few more moves here, probably because it was just approaching move 40, so my guess is he just wanted to see if Radjabov would make it to time control, or if he'd blunder something in time pressure, but he's obviously lost here. After king h5, bishop f5, king h4, rook g6, king g3. Black's king seemed to be running away, but it will get itself in a mating net as white has more pieces attacking than black can use to defend. After knight e6 check, king f3, and rook g4, this king is really starting to run short on squares, and indeed it got mated shortly after king e3. Rook g3 check, king d2. Rook g2 check, and now finally Sargsyan resigned here as he has no good defense to the threat of bishop c2 check and knight d3 mate. So this was a very good game by Radjabov, and it was largely a very strategic game, but it came down to a lot of calculation at a couple key moments. First of all, he saw all the key tactics, like at the moment when he could play e6, the moment when he played f4, f5, both of which involved some kind of temporary sacrifice, but the calculation wasn't wildly difficult, but it was still good to see. And then finally when he played e7 to win the piece at the end. But also it was a very good strategic game, and he really clearly understood what he had to be doing. This g4 move really showed a deep understanding of the position, because it looked a bit strange to open the king, but it was very, very important to make sure that, that black was unable to challenge this bishop on the a2 g8 diagonal. In any case, that will do it for this game, and I look forward to seeing you for lesson 2.